Shalom Aleichem, welcome. I'm Lisa Newman, the Yiddish Book Center's Director of Publishing and Public Programs. And once again, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Yiddish Book Center's virtual theater for tonight's program, Portico, Cooking and Feasting in Rome's Jewish Kitchen with Leah Koenig. Before we get started, a few things to note. Your video and audio will be out throughout the program. You may send us questions via the question panel at the lower right of your screen. We ask that you keep questions short and refrain from comments so that we can try to get to all the questions this evening. I'm delighted to introduce Leah. Leah is the author of 7 cookbooks, including the acclaimed The Jewish Cookbook and Modern Jewish Cooking. Her newest cookbook, Portico, Cooking and Feasting in Rome's Jewish Kitchen, is now available. Leah's writing and recipes can be found in the New York Times, New York Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Food and Wine, Epicurious, and Food 52, among other publications. She also writes a weekly newsletter, The Jewish Table, which shares recipes and stories from the world of Jewish food. In addition to writing, Leah leads cooking demonstrations and workshops around the country and the world. Welcome, Leah.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been too long since I've been in person at the Yiddish Book Center, but I'm glad to be here virtually with you.
Well, we look forward to welcoming you back into this evening's program.
Thank you. And yes, I've been doing a lot of traveling with my new book, Portico, which I have a copy of right here. Cooking and Feasting in Rome's Jewish Kitchen. And I've been going around the country, and it's wonderful to be back in person with people. But also I have found that the world of Zoom has just opened up our world so much. And, I hope that there are people joining us from near and far. I'm in Brooklyn, so wherever you are, I wish you a Shalom Aleichem. But we are actually not here to talk about Ashkenazi cuisine tonight. We're here to talk about Roman Jewish food. This is a subject I'm from an Ashkenazi background, Lithuanian and German on each side, and have always grew up eating brisket and cholent, and actually we didn't eat cholent because we weren't Shomer Shabbat growing up, but potato latkes and all of the hamantash and all of the kind of classics. But as someone who's been writing about Jewish food now for 15 years, and who's really interested in the stories behind food and the kind of cultural relevance of dishes, I've had the honor and the privilege to kind of learn about Jewish food from around the world, everywhere from India to Morocco to Mexico City to Eastern Europe and beyond. And I can truly say that there's no community that I have encountered that has touched my heart, or I would say inspired my palate as much as Rome's Jewish community. So I'm excited to kind of share a little bit more about who they are, and we're going to get to some photos from my travels there. I won't be a boring slideshow, I promise. We'll keep it interesting. But before we get to the slideshow, I just want to spend about 5 minutes describing who this community is. When I do these events in person, I usually ask people to raise their hands if they've been to Rome. So feel free to raise your hand in your living room, wherever you're watching from. And then I usually ask people to raise their hand if they've been to the Roman Jewish ghetto, which is the historic Jewish neighborhood inside of Rome. So raise your hand if you want virtually. And I have found that a lot of people have traveled pretty extensively in Rome and have some familiarity with the Jewish ghetto. But for folks who are less familiar, let me start by saying Rome's Jewish community is considered to be the oldest in Europe. It predates Ashkenazi, the kind of emergence of an Ashkenazi culture in Alsace and Germany, and it predates the beginning of Sephardi culture as well. So it's really an ancient, over 2,000-year-old community that has existed continuously during the last 2,000 plus years. And there are sort of three different groups of Jews within what I would consider the Roman Jewish community today. Because of course, even with there's only 17,000 Jews in Rome, so not a huge number, but of course there have to be multiple groups because that's how we do things. So the first group would be people who can trace their family lineage back to Roman times. And, you know, I don't know exactly what sort of documentation they have, but they're kind of the original Jews who came actually as emissaries of the Maccabees. So if that gives you some sort of sense of the timing. So it was around Hanukkah's coming up, the Hanukkah story took place in, you know, the 2nd century BCE. And that is when the first Jews came to Rome. So the second group of Jews who arrived in Rome came in larger numbers, and these were Jews from Portugal and Spain and Sicily, which might be ringing a bell of the Spanish Inquisition. So these were Jews who had to flee, you know, Spain and Portugal, and also Sicily, which at the time was ruled by Spain. Italy was not a unified country yet, so all the rules of the Inquisition, which basically said, you know, Jews had to convert to Catholicism, flee, go somewhere else, or be, you know, risk their lives. So a lot of Jews from those places ended up going lots of places, including to Rome. So this was in like the 15th, 16th century. You started to have a much, you know, larger community. And then the third community is very recent. It's after the 6-Day War in Israel. I know that region is very much on our minds right now. So that is when about 4,000 to 5,000 Jews from Libya came to Rome from Libya. And because Libya had been a colony of Italy, a lot of the Jews spoke at least some Italian, if not, if they weren't fluent. So it was kind of an obvious place for them to land. So, you know, now we have, in modern day times, we have 17,000 Jews living, cooking, arguing, kibitzing, you know, recalling their history in Rome. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. But first, I'm going to just quickly share my screen. Hold on one second. This never gets easier. I'm not seeing it for some reason. I did this a second ago. Let me see if I can figure out why. But so the most kind of, I would say, impactful time, I'm just going to re-pull it up. The most impactful time for Jews during, you know, the 2,000 years plus that, here we go. Sorry. Technical difficulties. Okay. Okay. Please load. All right. So prior to 1554, so 16th century, Jews lived everywhere in Rome. They could live freely. They could pray freely. They weren't always treated kindly. They were, you know, it was kind of depending on who was Pope. Sometimes they were treated better. Sometimes they were treated worse. But they were essentially allowed to go wherever they would like. And the majority of them lived in a neighborhood called Trastevere, which is still a neighborhood in Rome, which was on one side of the Tiber River. So if you're looking at the map on the screen, the yellow part is next to a river. That's the Tiber River. And Trastevere was just on the left, kind of left side of that. So in 1554, a particularly cruel Pope who did not care for the Jews in Rome and was particularly upset about the influx of several thousand more Jews who had arrived after the Inquisition, created a papal decree that said that Jews had to live in a ghetto. So the word ghetto is, it means what it means today, but is originally an Italian word. And it actually, ghetto, the word actually means a copper foundry. So like a building where copper is forged. And you might be saying, what's the connection between a copper foundry and a neighborhood where people are forced to live, or a slum where people are forced to live? And the connection is kind of hysterically literal in that the first ghetto in Italy was not in Rome, it was in Venice, about 40 years prior to the one in Rome. And that neighborhood was literally next to a copper foundry, or a ghetto. And so because of the physical proximity of the ghetto, the neighborhood became called the ghetto, and then that word spread. So just a little bit of linguistic etymology or history. So 1554, this Pope says, okay, Rome's Jews, you now have to live in this very small, very cramped, very undesirable part of the city, which you see represented in yellow on the map. And it's hard to really get a sense of what it was like, but especially because the neighborhood doesn't really look the same anymore, because after the ghetto ended, a lot of the buildings were raised and the streets were widened. But at the time, it was very dark. The buildings were stacked really high on top of one another, and they would keep building vertically because they couldn't build horizontally. It was a gated neighborhood that actually got locked at night. So Jews were allowed to leave during the day, but many of them chose not to because it wasn't particularly safe. But there was a curfew, and at night they had to come back. We'll get to the food in a second, I promise. I just want to share a little bit of the context. And on the right, you can see a picture of the ghetto neighborhood, I believe judging by the cars, probably like the 40s or 50s. And, obviously this wasn't ghetto times anymore. The ghetto was abolished in 1871. But you can get a sense of just, what the buildings looked like. Not fancy. And then because it was all in the Tiber River, the neighborhood also flooded regularly. It doesn't anymore because they have built embankments, but twice a year, if not more, during rainy times, it would flood. So just not a great place to live. And, Jews' lives were very just restricted in many, many ways. They were not allowed to do most professions. They were not allowed to buy certain types of food. Like, for example, there's a structure that I'll show you a picture of in a minute. That was where the fish market was. And Jews would go to the fish market, and there was a marble slab. And if a fish was put on the slab and the head came off one side and the tail went off the other, it was considered too large, and Jews were not allowed to buy that fish. So there were lots of little restrictions on their everyday lives that in many ways, just made life really cruel and intolerable. And it was a really hard 300 plus years. But, if there is a silver lining to that time of pain, it is that the Roman Jewish community really solidified and became quite, tightly knit as a community. And I'll get to that in a second. They became very tight knit and very proud of the culture that they created, and that pride really exists today, up till today. So these are 3 pictures from the Roman Jewish ghetto. I'll describe what's going on in them. And one of the things I am so obsessed about with this book is, I worked really hard on the recipes, but I had the good fortune of working with a photographer named Kristen Teague, who she and I traveled to Rome together to do some reporting and some shooting of the book. And her photos are just, they just captured the community spirit so perfectly. So I'm excited to share some of those with you today. When you go to the Roman ghetto today, you will see it's not necessarily, there aren't that many Jews left who live there. It's actually, ironically, now it's a very desirable part of Rome, and a lot of movie stars live there, and politicians, and people who can pay really exorbitant rents or can buy exorbitantly priced apartments. And the only Jews whose families are still there were the ones who were basically too poor to leave once the restriction was lifted. And so now they're sitting on very expensive real estate. So good for them. But even though it's not, where Jews live, it is very much where Jews gather. So in that middle picture, kind of on the bottom middle, you will see people sitting at restaurants. There are, restaurants lining the main street. Lining the main street that serve Roman Jewish dishes. And behind the kind of the coral colored wall behind that is where the Jewish school is. So about 800 students go to school in that building every day. And so around 3 o'clock, it's just this gorgeous cacophony of children and parents, and just life in the ghetto neighborhood. And then on the right, you see this beautiful structure. That's the Tempio Maggiore, which is the Great Synagogue. And so this building, and I love in Rome, just in general, how newer structures and older structures just interface. It's one of the most beautiful things about Rome. And the synagogue was built in 1904. So after Roman times, it was kind of we're going to celebrate that we can practice Judaism freely. Because during ghetto times, they were allowed to have one synagogue, but it was very small, and they could only have one. And there were 5 distinct communities of worship, of liturgy, right? Because you had the ancient Roman Jews who practiced in a style that was similar to what had been done in Jerusalem, right? You had Sephardis, Jews from Portugal, from Spain, from Sicily, and they all had their own styles of davening. So, being resourceful, they made 5 tiny synagogues within the one structure. So they were able to kind of have 5 different, services going on. But after the ghetto times, they built this big, beautiful synagogue, which houses 2. It houses a Sephardi minyan and a Roman minyan or prayer gathering. And then there's several other synagogues around the city at this point. And then on the top left, you'll see a structure called Portico de Ottavia, or Octavia's Porch. And that is where the book gets its title, Portico. And that structure is on one side of, it's basically the gateway to the Roman ghetto neighborhood. And that is where the fish market was, the place where Jews couldn't buy the large fish. So for hundreds and hundreds of years, that structure was used as an open air fish market. So you can imagine how lovely that smelled in in August when there was fish being sold. Okay. So the thing that captured me almost as much as the food of Rome, and I'll tell you in a little bit about my connection to there, but are the people, because they're just wonderful. They're vibrant. They love Judaism. They love their history. And they're happy to talk to you. And one of the things I love about the ghetto neighborhood is, in addition to being a place where the restaurants are and where the school is, it is the place where the elders come to gather. So even if they don't live in the neighborhood anymore, they come, they sit on benches, as you can see in this top left picture, these 4 beautiful Jewish nonas sitting, and they kibitz and they argue. And the gentleman in the blue shirt was describing how to trim an artichoke, which is kind of the most important vegetable to Roman Jews. And that's why I have a picture of one on the cover. And while he was describing how to do it, another woman from the community came up to him and started telling him, you don't know what you're talking about. This is not how you do it. My mother does it this way, and you've got it all wrong. And they got into this hilarious argument back and forth about how you trim an artichoke. So that was one of my favorite moments. But there's just a sense of joy in the neighborhood these days, and a sense of history that goes so far back. And on the right, you'll see a picture of a man. You can just see him from the back. His name is Emmanuel. He's 92, I believe, and he grew up in the ghetto neighborhood, and he still lives in the same building, different apartment, but the same building that he grew up in. And I just think it's so incredible that he's watched this neighborhood that was, even when he was young, was still very much impoverished and not a nice place to live, turn into this beautiful place. So let's start to talk a little bit about the food. So I actually, this picture of me in the middle on the bottom, I was 26. And my husband is next to me. We were there on our honeymoon. Today's actually our anniversary. So that's this is a fun way to remember that. And we went to Rome for our anniversary. For our honeymoon. And it was really a life-changing trip for me. I was, just kind of getting started as a writer. I knew I loved food. I knew I wanted to write about food. And I wasn't quite ready to commit to writing about Jewish food because I didn't want to be pigeonholed, and I wanted to be worldly, and I wanted to, I didn't realize yet that Jewish cuisine was a way to see the world, because Jews have lived and cooked everywhere. So we went on this trip, and, while I was there, we met with a lot of people in the community, and I was thinking maybe I could write a story, and I ended up writing a story for the Forward, which I know is a publication near and dear to probably a lot of people in this call. And it changed my life. And the reason it did was, you see in that central picture, the much shorter couple standing next to me and Yoshi. So that is Giovanni and Yael. And Giovanni runs a kosher catering company called Le Bon Ton in Rome. And he invited us over for a Shabbat dinner. And when we arrived to the dinner, well, first of all, I had been a vegetarian for about 10 years at that point, and everything on his table was meat. There were these chicken and veal meatballs that were served in a tomato and celery stew. There was a dish called stracotto di manzo that I'll show you in a second. That is basically their version of beef stew with red wine and tomato passata. And everything looked really great. And I was a vegetarian. And so I turned to Yoshi and my husband, and I said, if the phrase "when in Rome" ever applies, it's going to be tonight, and I'm going to eat everything. And so I did. And it was wonderful. And I wasn't a vegetarian for all that much longer, but I think I was on my way out anyway. But what really struck me about that night was that nothing on the table was familiar, right? We were at the Shabbat dinner. There was no challah, first of all, right? Because Roman Jews don't use challah. They just use regular Italian bread to make motzi for Shabbat dinner. And I learned that the hard way, because I dragged Yoshi to a bakery looking for challah so we could bring one. And they were like, we don't sell challah. This is not Germany. This is not America. This is not Israel. This is not, we don't do that. So, live and learn. And nothing that he was serving was familiar in any way to what I had grown up eating on Shabbat. But it immediately felt familiar, because the context was the Shabbat table, this, gathering together with friends, making the blessing over the wine and talking like old friends within a matter of minutes. And it was a moment that it really occurred to me, how broad and how deep and how diverse Jewish communities and Jewish food really was. It wasn't just Ashkenazi food. It wasn't just Sephardi food. It wasn't just Middle Eastern and Mizrahi food. It was the whole world. And it was a moment where I said, wow, not only can I try to make a career out of writing about Jewish food, but I want to. So in many ways, this book, Portico, is 15 years in the making, because it started at that dinner table. I didn't know it yet, but that's when I was thinking about what book I wanted to write next after my last one. I wanted to do something personal, and my heart immediately went to Rome. So the reason I wanted to talk about, that dinner, and on the top left, you see a picture of a dinner that I went to more recently when I was there with the photographer, is that Roman Jewish life is it's extant. It exists. They're thriving. It is a community of people who, it's not just about history. It's very much still an active and vibrant community today. And it also exists outside of the Roman Jewish ghetto, right? That's the heart center, but Roman Jews live all around the city again. And, you can find, even though it's a small percentage, you can find their presence everywhere. And I'm not exactly sure why I included the women of the bakery on this top right picture on this slide. Thematically, I probably could have done that differently, but I will tell you about them. So this is, if you've been to Rome and you've been to the Roman Jewish ghetto, you've probably stopped at Pasticceria Il Boccioni, which is a 200-year-old Jewish bakery that has no signage, is in a hole in the wall. You can blink and you miss it. And the women who run it, they're all part of the same family, are brusque. They don't welcome you with open arms. They basically say, what do you want? Here you go, and shove you out the door because there's a line, down the block. But everything they make is so charming and so tasty. And I just think they're the most quintessential, like, Roman Jewish business. So I wanted to include them. I love their faces. And they're standing in front of a dessert called pizza Ebraica, or Jewish style pizza, but it's not pizza with cheese and sauce. It's a bar cookie with pine nuts and raisins and almonds and dried or candied cherries and candied citron or orange peel. And it's just one of the most intriguing and delicious desserts I've ever had. And I worked really hard to get the recipe as close as possible to the one at Boccioni in the book, because they wouldn't share the recipe with me, and I don't blame them. That's proprietary. So I had to reverse engineer the recipe. But yes, the community, they welcomed me with open arms, and they were happy to share their stories for the book, which is really what I wanted the book to do. Okay, here's a few more scenes from the Roman ghetto. So in the middle, there's a smiling woman at Boccioni holding another one of their, I would say, most iconic desserts. It's a sour cherry and ricotta crostata, or a double crusted pie. It is wildly delicious. They use a sheep's milk ricotta, so it just has so much rich flavor. And it's one of their most requested dishes. And it actually has a fascinating story. So one of the restrictions during ghetto times was that Jews were not allowed to sell dairy products, bread, or meat to Christians. And I looked this up, and I found the primary source. This is factual. This is not lore. And it was just a way to further kind of limit the Jewish community and restrict their ability to make a living. So the legend part goes that this pie, which has two crusts, a bottom crust and a top crust, which is unusual in Rome. Usually you find open-faced pies or pies with a lattice where you can see the filling. So the story goes that, being, trying to find a way around this restriction, Roman Jews put a top crust on the pie to conceal what was inside so that you could sell it and kind of get around the prohibition. So that's a story. I don't know if that's true or not, but I love that kind of idea of getting around a restriction like that. On the right, you will see me, my hands pulling apart fried mozzarella. And fried foods are very much a part of Roman Jewish cuisine. There's also lots of vegetables and, saucy braised dishes and much lighter fare. But fried food is really a huge part of Roman Jewish cuisine. And a big part of the reason of that is because one of the other professions that Jews were allowed to have, or one of the only professions, was to be street vendors. So they could sell knickknacks and schmatas and, like bits of cloth and whatever. But many Jews chose to be frigatori, or basically like people who sold fried food on the street vendors, like imagine like a push cart or that kind of a thing. So they would sell battered and fried mozzarella and vegetables, and most famously artichokes, because Roman Jews are obsessed with artichokes. And I'll show you a picture of one of the Roman Jewish artichokes in a minute. It's one of the most delicious things I've ever eaten in my life. And so today, when you go to the Roman Jewish ghetto and you go to one of the restaurants, you will find a whole array of fried bacala, which is salt cod, fried anchovies, fried zucchini blossoms that are stuffed with mozzarella sometimes, fried artichokes, fried zucchini that gets marinated. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. Just incredibly delicious things. And on the left of the screen is a picture of a place called La Taverna del Ghetto. So it opened in, I believe, the late 1990s, and it was really one of the first restaurants that said, we are really going to celebrate, sorry, siren going by. We're going to celebrate Roman Jewish cuisine, and we think that other people would want to try it. So there were a few restaurants in Rome already that served the fried artichokes and some of the more iconic dishes, but they really went all out and had a whole menu of Roman Jewish specialties, and they're still there today. And it's not my favorite restaurant. I think there's other places that do it better, but it is, historically, I would say it is one of the most important restaurants. And I just love the picture of that waiter and the older gentleman. I don't even like checking his wallet or something. It's a great photo that Kristen took. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the dishes themselves, and then I'm going to open things up for questions. And I want to hear, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat now. And if you've been to the Roman Jewish ghetto and you have a very like 1 or 2 sentence reflection, I'm also would love to hear like memories if people want to share that. Okay, so these are some of my favorite dishes from Portico. These are all pictures that are in the book and recipes that are in the book. So on the very top left, that was taken in the Roman Jewish ghetto at a restaurant, and it is a fried artichoke. So that dish is called carciofi alla Judia, or Jewish style artichokes. And everyone kind of, because Roman Jewish food is so ancient and the community is so ancient, it can be hard to kind of tell which dishes come from Roman Jews and spread more widely, or which dishes the Jews kind of adopted from their neighbors and altered for for their holidays and Shabbat. But everyone agrees that artichokes are a Jewish dish, a Roman Jewish dish. And if you've never had one, I like to describe them as, so you take the artichoke and you pare back a lot of the kind of tough outer leaves. And because I know that Americans, myself included, don't have a lot of experience with it, I show a step-by-step. Here, I don't know if you can see this. This is a picture of a restaurant employee paring, they make crates and crates of artichokes into fried artichokes. But in the book, I include a step-by-step of how they do it, because I feel like in America, we steam artichokes and we eat them with butter or aioli or something, but Roman Jews have so many different preparations of how they make artichokes in frittatas and spaghetti dishes. They make artichoke carpaccio, where they slice it really thin and marinate it with citrus juice and olive oil. And they're all spectacular, but my favorite is this deep fried artichoke. So you take off the outer leaves and you fry it one time in a low heat oil. So like maybe 275 degrees. And that cooks the artichoke through, and it makes the heart very tender and very kind of velvety and soft. And then you take it out of the heat, out of the oil, you let it cool, and then you pry open the, I guess, rosebud looking artichoke. And so you expose the leaves, and then you fry it a second time in a hotter oil, like 350 or kind of typical deep frying temperature. And it crisps up the leaves, as you can see, into almost like artichoke potato chips, so that you have this velvety center and this super crisp and crunchy leaves, and you know, a little bit of salt and a little lemon juice, and it's literally to die for. So they're a pain in the butt to make. I do include a recipe for them in the book, but I also say probably better to go to Rome and just eat them at the source, unless you really want to try it for like a Hanukkah project, in which case more power to you. But the other recipes in the book are much more approachable. That one is just, it's, yeah, worth every second, but hard. The picture next to it is a dish called concha, which is a fried and marinated zucchini dish, where basically you slice the zucchini either in planks or coins. Different home chefs tell you that they prefer one or the other. I like it better in slices because I like to layer the zucchini onto a sandwich when I'm done eating it, or when I'm done making it. So you fry it, and then you marinate it with red wine vinegar and basil and mint and garlic, and it is just so wonderful. You can eat it as a side dish. You can eat it as you know, a sandwich topper. You can mix it with pasta. It's wonderful. And next to that picture is the beef stew I was talking about. It's called stracotto di manzo. And it basically is similar to brisket or beef stew. You start with a braising cut of meat, right? The Jews didn't have a lot of money during the ghetto times, or really any money. So they had to kind of use less desirable cuts of meat, similar to why brisket became a thing in Ashkenazi cuisine. And so they would braise it with sometimes wine, but not always, olive oil and tomato passata, which is basically like a strained tomato puree. You can find it in the States, comes in glass bottles usually. And they cook it forever and ever, and the sauce becomes really rich and thick, and the meat becomes really tender. And you serve it in two different courses. The first course, you have a lot of sauce, and so you spoon the sauce and mix it with rigatoni, which you can see in the picture, and then you eat that as the first course. And then the second course, you eat the meat with whatever else you're serving. So it's very like homey cooking at its best. So next to that picture, you might be saying, that one looks a little different than the others. And you are correct. That is a vegetable tagine that is served over couscous. And that is an example of one of the dishes brought to Rome by the Libyan Jews, right? Because, you know, they're from North Africa, so their cuisine is quite different. And so they have brought various stews and traditional dishes with them. And when I spoke to and interviewed Libyan Jews for this book, a lot of them told me that, you know, their families were met with not the most open arms by the kind of more established Roman Jewish community. They didn't really consider them part of the community for the first several generations. And it's really only in the more recent years where the community has started to, you know, be more accepting and tolerant. And you start to have families where one parent is Libyan and one parent is, you know, like Roman Jew back to the time of Caesar. So you're also starting to see the food mix a little bit, right? Like sometimes you'll have the beef stew served over couscous instead of over rigatoni, like that kind of mashup sort of thing. But I love this tagine or stew, vegetable stew. It's totally vegan. It's filling. It's delicious. It's perfumed with a little bit of turmeric and cinnamon, and it's just like a really delicious stew. So I'm glad to have it in the book. Okay, two more quick things. And then I want to take your questions. So on the bottom, you see the pizza Ebraica, that bar cookie I was telling you about. So here it is with the ladies in front. They bake it in these giant sheet trays and then kind of cut it up. And here it is, my version, which I bake them separately because I found they browned better that way in a home oven. But they're so addictively delicious. It's like a power bar, but and a cookie, and it has a little bit of almond flour in it, so it's chewy and really spectacular. And then I wanted to highlight this last dish, which is basically, it's called mele frite, or fried apples. So you basically take apples and you core them and slice them into rings, enrobe them in a batter and fry them, and they become, it's hard to describe how delicious they are. The apples get custardy and sweet and soft, and the batter is just like light and airy, and like they're basically like an apple donut. And I wanted to share it because Hanukkah is coming up, and so this is a spectacular dish to add to your whatever latkes or sufganiyot or whatever else you're planning to serve for Hanukkah. They're easy to make and just really, really delicious. So I wanted to make sure I called those out. So that is mostly what I wanted to share. And I know it was a little bit sprawling and all over the place, but hopefully you got a sense of just kind of how vibrant and how ancient this community really is. And I'm gonna end my portion by quickly showing you one more picture from when Yoshi and I, Lisa, you can come back on, that's okay. A picture of me and Yoshi. This was at our on our honeymoon, and we look so baby faced. And we're toasting with mint tea, which is also from the Libyan Jewish community at a Jewish food festival in Rome. And so I keep this picture. Usually it's behind me next to the photo of our kids, but I thought I would share it as just a fun memory.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm probably like the over 200 other people in the audience who are just so hungry. But that's just divine. And I'll start by saying somebody has written to say you need to organize a tour of Rome for your fans. And I've already been in touch with Elizabeth, our producer, saying we're taking this on the road with you.
Yes, I would love that.
Glorious. So more to come about that. I'm going to jump into questions. Could you say anything more about Sicilian Jewish contributions food-wise?
Yes. So prior to the ghetto times, and prior to the Inquisition, rather, the south of Italy was really where most of the Jews were. It's where the largest population was, in Sicily and other parts of the south. Unfortunately, those communities were essentially wiped out with the Inquisition. So today you don't have a lot of active communities in the South, but you do see their influence in Roman Jewish cuisine, because they brought artichokes. I'm fairly certain. They had learned about them from North African and Arab traders, from Moorish traders from Spain, where they had been cultivated, and they were some of the first people in Sicily to start eating artichokes, because everyone else were like, what's this weird thistle? It's probably poisonous. And the Jews didn't have a lot of means or resources, so they took to them. So much so they were called the Jewish vegetable in the south of Italy for a long time before they became more popular. So I'm pretty sure those came up with Sicilian Jews. Also, the existence of like pine nuts and raisins in sweet and savory dishes, and baking with ground almonds. Those are all Sephardic contributions to the cuisine. So lots of delicious things.
This participant says, love the Roman Jewish ghetto. Roman Jewish history is so interesting, and the Jewish community is special, so warm and welcoming. A question: one Italian Jewish cookbook I have features a recipe for chicken soup with Parmesan cheese. Is that really a thing? Obviously not for people who keep kosher. Thanks for the talk.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. I'm curious which one it is. There's a few kind of classic Italian Jewish cookbooks out there that have been around for a long time. Edison Reed-Macklin's books are the most famous. But you know, obviously, like Jews everywhere, some Italian Jews keep kosher and some don't. But I have never seen that particular dish. Yeah.
Okay, but doesn't mean you can't throw some Parmesan in there.
Hey, no, I'm not judging.
You mentioned layering zucchini on sandwiches. One anecdote I love from the book was the sandwich making with a Roman Jewish woman who was horrified that you were putting zucchini and tomato and mozzarella all in one sandwich. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Yes. I was going to share that story and I thought I was talking for too long, so I didn't, but I'm glad you mentioned it. So, when I was in Rome most recently with the book, I, was cooking with my friend Michaela, who's a tour guide there, who I feature prominently in the book. And, we were making sandwiches with pizza with my brain is not working. A pizza bianca, which is basically like focaccia bread, sliced tomatoes, the zucchini concha that I showed you, and mozzarella. And so she was like, "Can you make the sandwiches?" I said, "Sure." So I'm putting like a little bit of tomato, a little bit of zucchini, and a little bit of mozzarella on every sandwich. And she looked over and she was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "You can't put it all on one sandwich. It's either tomato and mozzarella or tomato and zucchini." And I was like, "Why?" And it was just this moment of me realizing how tightly and how important tradition is for them, and how I came to this project very much as an American with a more flavor, more is more, approach. And so, of course, it was just a good teaching moment and also a good moment where I rooted myself and said, okay, I'm coming with my biases as a American, Ashkenazi American Jew. So, yeah. But I will say,
yeah.
She took a bite and she said, "It's okay." So she begrudgingly said it was okay.
What is the sauce with the apple rings?
The sauce?
Yes, that's the question.
So there's no sauce. They're battered in like a traditional Roman batter, which is flour, water, a little baking soda to help it brown. And then you just kind of dip the apple slices in there and then fry them in oil so they puff up. They're traditionally served with either vanilla sugar or cinnamon. You could do cinnamon sugar or powdered sugar, but traditionally it's vanilla sugar. So there's no sauce, but they don't really need it. They're delicious.
They look really good. Let's see, is there any place that you know of in Metro New York where you can find Roman Jewish food?
Yeah, there is a place. It's in Midwood in Brooklyn, and it is called Trastevere, I believe, which is the name of the old Jewish neighborhood prior to the ghetto. It's kosher, and I have not been there just because of like during COVID times when I was working on the book, they were kind of closed, but I should go there because it sounds delicious. So yes, you can try it there if you're willing to come all the way out to Midwood or if you live there.
Another adventure, we'll all jump on a bus.
Yeah.
We loved the bakery in the Jewish Quarter just a couple of weeks ago. Why is pizza, and I hope I can pronounce this, Ebraica, sorry,
Yeah.
called pizza, and what is the origin? Do you know?
Yes. So that dessert is almost certainly from the South. It's definitely a Sephardic dish because of the almond flour and the pine nuts and raisins. The word pizza traditionally, like in a long time ago, basically meant pie. And it became tied to the pizza that we know today, which is, we also call them a pizza pie, right? So the word is still there. But before it was kind of so closely associated with the dough and cheese and sauce version, it just meant pie. So and Ebraica means Jewish, like Hebrew. So it's a Jewish style pie. Sorry. I will say it's also called pizza baride, which is close to the word bris, and it's because it's a cookie that's often served after a bris.
Oh,
yeah.
Did they use kosher meat, and where did they get it? I guess did they have kosher butchers, basically?
So in Roman times, yes, there would have been kosher butchers, and today, there's kosher butcher shops around Rome. Not all of the restaurants in the Roman ghetto are kosher, but many of them are. So yeah, they find ways to, just like anywhere, they have uh, shochet's, kosher slaughterers who do it, and kosher butchers.
Uh, Love the photos of the Roman ghetto, having spent some time there. Are most of the restaurants there actually owned by Jews today?
Yes, most of them are the ones that are selling Jewish food. But what's interesting is a lot of the ones that serve traditional Roman Jewish specialties are actually owned by Libyan Jews. So there's a few that have like, you know, Roman Jewish food, but then also tagine or also couscous or also like falafel or Middle Eastern kind of stuff on the menus also. But they are mostly owned by the Jewish community.
So one could say that pesto has Jewish origins, since some of the ingredients are pine nuts and question mark after that. Yes.
Mhm. I don't know the history of pesto. That's a good
Okay.
question. I'd have to look that up.
Uh, um, when I make the pizza Ebraica from your Jewish cookbook, they look very pink from the wine. Why do yours look so different?
So yes, so I have a recipe for pizza Ebraica in my last cookbook, the Jewish cookbook also. That's a very different recipe. Like all baked goods, there's a version that people make at home, right? And there's a version that is made at the bakery that everybody kind of references. And so the one in the Jewish cookbook is more of like the home one, and I use a sweet wine because that was the recipe that I learned. And so it gives it a little bit of a purple tinge. Sometimes I even use grape juice when I'm making it. But the one at the bakery, I also noticed that it was lighter, and so I used a white wine, so it doesn't get that same color. But for this book, I really wanted it to be true to the one from the bakery, so that was kind of my gold standard. But I mean, think about a hamantaschen you make at home, and then a hamantaschen you see at like a kosher bakery that are like this big and totally different textured cookies. So it's just variations of the same recipe. But I would actually say I like the one in Portico the best because it's close to the bakery one.
Is most fried food fried in olive oil, or is butter used?
Butter is definitely not used because I feel like just people don't fry in butter all that much. Roman Jews traditionally did fry in olive oil because it was locally produced, it was abundant, it was inexpensive, right? Opposite of what we think of with olive oil as being sort of a specialty imported, not anymore maybe, but when it was first becoming popular. But I don't particularly love frying in olive oil because it has a fairly low smoke point. And so when you heat it up, it starts to give off a kind of acrid smell. So what I suggest is that people fry either in light olive oil, which doesn't mean light calories, it just means processed so that it can have a higher smoke point, and you still get a little of that olive taste, or to use a neutral oil like sunflower or grapeseed or something that is traditionally used for frying.
No, is wine important in their cooking?
Yeah, I mean, not terribly. That you see a lot of wine being drunk. It's Italy, right? You think of red wine, but you only really see it in a few dishes.
Which languages did you encounter during your research? Did anyone speak about the Roman Jewish language?
Yeah, so obviously most people spoke to me in Italian, and I know a little, and then had translators help me with the rest. But there is a Roman Jewish dialect. It's Judaico-Romanesco, which is their version of Yiddish or Ladino, right? It mixes Italian and some Spanish from the Sephardi side, and Hebrew. So a lot of the elders still speak it. A lot of the younger generation less so, but there is a little bit of something akin to the Yiddish revival happening, where like younger people are interested in learning it. Not to the same degree, but yeah.
Well, that was one of the questions. Did you hear any Yiddish when you were there?
Maybe from other tourists who were visiting, but not from the community, no. Except for oy vey, which is everywhere.
We think of the language as sentences.
Yes.
Um, although no challahs, are there any traditional Jewish breads?
Weirdly, not really. There's a lot of rice, there's pasta, but not a lot of breads. They just eat the same breads that their neighbors do. So, pizza bianca, which there's a recipe for in the book, is kind of like a focaccia that is very common. And then just regular Italian breads. I don't personally think of bread as being like the hallmark of Roman cuisine. There's, pizza and so many other great carbs, but I don't think of bread as being like their star.
Related to that, did you learn anything about Roman matzah production? Does anyone make their own, whether in a private house or in a communal oven?
Yeah, I mean, in the ghetto, there is a ruin that is basically it was the old matzah bakery during ghetto times. So today, I mean, I think a lot of people get matzah in boxes, right? It's, you can import it from wherever, from Israel or from the States or wherever you want. I don't think there's a ton of people who make it, or I would have heard about it. There's probably some families who do, but interestingly, they do make a cookie called cimbalete, which is a recipe for in the book, which is a Passover cookie made from flour, like not matzah meal, actual flour. And when I asked about it, the woman I interviewed told me that they make it in 18 minutes, very similar to matzah. So they have to make the whole thing and bake it before 18 minutes comes up, because that's the moment where things magically get leavened according to tradition. And there's been some kerfuffle in the community about whether they should still be doing that. So they've created these like communal baking days where people come and under the surveillance basically of a kosher supervisor, they bake quickly to make sure that they're kosher for Passover. But I personally eat those cookies not on Passover.
How did you find all of these recipes? Was that a long, hard search?
Yeah, people were very generous with sharing family recipes. A lot of people photographed copies of like their family's cookbook that like their grandmother had written, and those recipes, they obviously were not in great shape, but they were wonderful as kind of resources and starting points. I also cooked with a lot of people, both over Zoom during the earlier part of the pandemic and then in person when I was there. And they taught me how to make various cakes and various things. And then some of the dishes I kind of reverse engineered from foods I had tasted when I was in the ghetto, but hadn't had someone show me how, but could remember enough to get to the recipe. So it was a mix. It was a mix of things.
This isn't really food, but more about the community as a whole. Do you know how did the community survive World War II?
Yes. So as some folks probably know, Italy switched alliances halfway through the war. So Mussolini, that was an ally basically with the Nazis. And so for the first part of the war, Germany kind of left Roman Jews alone. They didn't really bother them much, and so they kind of assumed they were safe. But then when Italy switched and became an ally of, America and England and whatever, Germany did come in. And there was one day, it was in 1943 in October, I think October 17th, 16th or 17th. So it recently just had an anniversary. And they rounded up 1,000 Jews of about 9,000 that lived there at the time in the ghetto. And of that 1,016 came back. So not many. And from what I was told, a lot of the, Jewish children were hidden in convents and monasteries. And so, the priests and nuns, maybe begrudgingly, but they took them in and hid them. And so it was halfway through the war already, so it wasn't as long of having to hide them, but that was kind of how the rest of the community survived.
I'm going to make that our last question, even though we have a sea of them coming. But I want to say thank you, Leah, for preserving that community and moving it forward with the book and your recipes.
Mm.
Fascinating conversation. More about it, I hope.
Yeah.
And congratulations on yet another amazing cookbook. And you've got a hungry audience of us all out there.
Oh, wonderful. And I don't know, did you guys have a chance to share? I'll drop.
Oh, yes. Well, I was going to close out with that, which is for everybody who is in the audience. We're having a technical problem with sharing a slide right now, but the book is Portico, Cooking and Feasting in Rome's Jewish Kitchen. It's available wherever books are sold. You can order a copy at shop.yiddishbookcenter.org. And if I may, would suggest you order several copies because it is really a great gift.
And because, well, I was going to say, because Roman food is so much about fried food, it's a great Hanukkah gift.
Yes. So get your copy now. And I hope that we all meet again in Rome, and feast out with you.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was great.
I hope we have you back again soon. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks. And I'd like to thank this evening's producer, Elizabeth Carteropoli, behind the scenes, making it all happen. Tonight's program is part of our ongoing series of virtual and live public programs. We've got a really packed calendar of events coming up, from live events in New York, Miami, Chicago, and Amherst, as well as a full slate of virtual programs. And we are also doing more to bring programming back live at the Yiddish Book Center. So plan to come and tour our new exhibition, our core exhibition, Yiddish, a Global Culture. Take in a movie, take in a talk, but do visit us. And you can check out these full calendar of event listings at yiddishbookcenter.org/events. I want to take a moment to thank all of our members out there who make all of our ongoing work possible. Without it, we couldn't keep all of these programs on the air. So please consider becoming a member if you're not, or increasing your donation. It's renewal season. So join us again. Again, thank you so much for making it all possible. yiddishbookcenter.org/donate. See you again very soon. Thanks again.